as well. And now the talk we have to cat content. Yeah. So two people you probably already know. She's called Jinx, Claudia Zotzmann-Koch, and on the other end we have René Pfeiffer. You probably know him by the name Lynx. He is a freelance sysadmin and he's speaker at a trade school or a trade college in Vienna. Yeah, thanks for joining us. So the title of the talk, or basically more the topic of the discussion, Murderboard, where crime story, privacy, and IT security come together, and it's described as a combination of small and big dangers, and nobody should be able to say that does not affect me. So I will now leave the stage for you. Have fun. Okay, so let's start. Why Murderboard? And how did we get the idea? Claudia, you know Murderboard better than me. Why Murderboard? Yeah, maybe the story leading up to it. In summer, I was asked for a smaller company to make a risk assessment because they thought that they might be losing data and another company would be attacking them. And yeah, I made a small questionnaire, and a lot of that was fed by my experience in the area of IT security and many years of data activism. And this list, I gave it to René, who also does penetration testings in companies. And he said, well, yep, everything in there. I was like, great. And used this list and gave it to the company. And yeah, he also said, a good hint, just make a murder board. And I was like, what? Yeah, this idea is great. So to just put together in one space for the customer, but I mean, everyone here can do it for friends and family. Just collect what are the danger potentials. So this idea, it's not my problem, I have nothing to hide, to just get rid of that. To really analyze it. What are the connections? So not just the main point, yeah, I'm here, these are my data, and I have nothing to hide. And even if some or all of it is online, freely accessible in the internet, what could anybody want from me? And yeah, then you can maybe know it from CIA movies, have these crime boards where there's a lot of points and strings between and connections between them. So yeah, use that for data security. And then we thought, well, that's actually a great idea. Maybe we should have a talk together and a blog post series about it. Yeah, and this is the first result of this. And the rest you can rewatch and listen to later. And let's just begin before it gets too abstract, because that was the main idea. To imagine threats is very abstract, and it just gets plastic or easier to imagine once you write it down. So I probably forgot one of the slides, but let's start with traces. Because many people think, yeah, but internet and network, that's so new. That's not actually true. Either it is a space, it's not a space without rights, and it's not really new. So before, it was the thing that was used now for marketing and everything, the same thing was there in recent centuries. It just was built a bit differently, and there were traces. And we have a nice example for that. Data are our constant companions. Right now, we are generating data continuously. All the viewers, once you just touch your phone, you're generating data. It's just everywhere. So, another thing that's also everywhere is news and money. Because nothing happens without someone profiting. If you measure it in money or something else, that doesn't matter right now. And Claudia, you know, we can come to motivation. Why is someone doing anything? Why is anyone doing crime? Yeah. Who profits? Cui bono, the good old who profits. And nothing gets lost. And you can't just upload it or download it. It's just there. It's part of the motivation. Of course, social media has its own role. And social media has existed for a longer time. So participate in a forum and discuss, ideally, or using the thing for actions or agents. That's nothing new, but back to traces. Everything we are seeing here generates traces, and you can easily show that. If we go back to the Murderboard and modeling, just write what you're doing on post-its and put that on the floor, and then use thread to make connections, and suddenly you get a picture. And then you are surprised once you see what can be read out of all this. In the past years, there was the discussion about drone and development action, and traces are usually metadata, and there is not really content in there, but who is where and with whom. And currently, the Corona tracing app also tries to figure out that. It's not really working, but they're trying. And the same could be done for many areas of life. And the interesting thing about all these traces, all this data and the metadata is that these are on all of our so if I have my computer, my smartwatch, all of these devices have data. And if I imagine now just a real thing or a real background, just imagine a young student does not have too much money and says, well, my laptop broke, I need a new one, and I need to write something, or my lessons are online. Then they have the option to just buy a refurbished device, or maybe just give your old device and as a trade-in. And now a young student, university student, turns in their old device and leaves in the hard drives, then all the data is handed over as well. And we do not know what happens afterwards. On the other hand, you could say, I deleted everything, right? Well, deleting data it's not that easy. The question is, how do you do it? There are services and software, and there's a very old paper where they say overwrite it 36 times. That might not be necessary with new data, but then you have SD cards, cameras, and phones, where you can also do a factory reset, but you cannot really check. You cannot really test, but you can't also just melt in everything, because there might be a value. You might want to resell it, and also it's not sustainable to just destroy everything you used once. So this problem is not going away. And then the next problem is, if I maybe can't really or did not delete this data, what will happen with them once they are out there in the world? And that is where not only the people who want to make money, not only they have access, and there is some collections of data that are sold, and companies or also officials can buy that. But also official agencies, they can also want to use data for other things. Yeah, so the slides are working, great. Sooner or later, there is a context. Whoever is working with that, and there might be detections or investigations that could be in a company, or something happened. Somebody thinks data might have been stolen, it could have been physical, and yeah, was there damages, or was it more important? And then that it's handed over to an agency that starts an investigation. And I know there is usually an argument or a discussion, but there are some things that are always valid no matter what technology is used. For example, motivation. And you probably already know that there are cryptocurrencies, and people want to regulate that and to see, well, who is using that and for what. And with cryptocurrencies, it's very easy to see who paid what where. It's not anonymous because everything can be seen. Antivirus companies do that, for example. So payment methods and accounts are very important. So who bought something online and who did not want to go to a shop and look for it, because you know exactly what online shop has it. And then automatically you are with payment methods and delivery, more importantly, because you can't order something anonymously. That just doesn't work. And that's also a classical point where usually online crime, when we're talking about online crime, that especially when we're talking about delivery, and there is something that should be delivered, for example, buying a weapon. And yeah, if I want to buy a weapon in the darknet and want to tell people how it works with Bitcoin, and the classical break is as soon as there is a physical object that has to be handed over. And that is the moment where agencies step in and can arrest people.
Yeah. That's an important part of it, because in security incidents, we also look for a trace. And the same, well, I've been actively fighting spam for many years, and false names are often used there. So you can also use other mail programs in order to get a second email. And the same goes for social media accounts. You can create fake identities there. Those are traces that we can use. And we can take that to another level. For example, if you're getting mysterious emails about inheritances again and again, you wouldn't get them if there wasn't kind of an organization or group of people behind that. Those are campaigns that are made up from loads of data that were stolen at some point. Well, I mentioned a PC at the beginning of the talk, and yeah, if you have like a complete computer with hard drive and all that, for example, from the student I just mentioned as an example, then this can easily be used for this kind of scam. Because usually you have good spam filters and you're not alerted about suspicious activity. There's no such thing as digital theft. There's just copying. In a physical theft, you see what has been stolen at once. In a digital theft, you don't see that. You don't see which data have been stolen. So data are just copied. An unknown number of other people now has access to these data. Yeah, and if you configure a spam filter, you can see that you can find your way around a lot of these things. And well, when having customers, I like to use a specific term because companies never believe that anyone would target them. And many spam mails sent today are from compromised systems. They weren't targeted, but they just happened to be compromised. And that is why I talk about phishing. Because if you chance upon data that are useful for you, you're already in. And you're part of some sort of campaign. Yeah. And the same can also happen with dentist data, for example, or no, payment data such as credit card data, PayPal, and all that. And that can result, for example, in having deductions from your personal account, and you don't know where they come from because you have no idea that your data have been stolen. And other people have access to your data. And it'll take you a lot of time and effort to call your bank, block your card, and all that. So you lose a lot of time. And you need to take care of that. And also, well, at the same time, you don't know where else your data might have ended up. And this, well, as I said, this takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to fix one issue, and 1,000 other issues may arise at the same time. And the problems we're conscious of are often the smallest. Yeah. It started with a sold disk drive. And people automatically look for certain target data. And it can happen anywhere. It can't. It doesn't only happen to people like we mentioned in our example of the student selling their computer. And if we take a look behind the scenes, we see a whole system and many stakeholders collaborating, because data aren't just copied and used at once. Because just like in the real world, well, when people steal a thing, it takes them some time to figure out what is it, what price can I sell it for. And the same happens in the digital world, where hackers need to find out what kind of data did I stumble upon. Is that identity real? They have to check whether For example, an email or a telephone number is working. And so they need to kind of process their data and make them more valuable by correlating them. And that includes metadata, contacts, addresses, names. Things that provide context are much more important than the actual content of an email, because it helps you create context. And if you do that professionally, you can find other potential victims on the way. Okay, well, talking about what are metadata? Metadata are any data that are additional to the intercepted message. For example, if I send my boyfriend to the supermarket to get milk and bread is the content data, but there's a lot of metadata that is much more important, and which is the actual interesting information for others. Who is going, why, when, and where, taking which route, which kind of traffic, and all those data are part of an image of our life, a picture of our life, which we can deduct. And that includes, for example, pictures or Excel sheets containing data such as the current height you're at. So you have a lot of additional information here. Location data, for example. So this is a kind of organized data warehousing. And that can also happen in the real world. Sometimes in a real world, data like that are also stolen. Data are collected, processed, correlated, and then sold. You can see price lists for stolen data on the internet. Actually, organized crime has been doing what Facebook is doing for much, much longer. Yeah, it's a story of inspiration. So there are interconnections that are very important and very relevant because they provide context and they actually, well, they help achieve the goal. Yeah, also in the US with pizza delivery to the Pentagon. Because pizza deliveries, for example, help determine how many people live in a house. But that is taking us too far. Yeah, but this year we have an advantage because ParivacyWeek is distributed all over the German-speaking countries. So it will be more difficult to make context, to create context from our data because we're not in one place. So there's always a countermeasure. And we were talking about fictitious examples and just kind of let our imagination run wild. But imagination is just one step ahead before paranoia. But this is what we have to do. This is what I do when I analyze threats. Because if you can imagine it, you can do it. People are very creative, absolutely. Well, then let's talk about authorities. The Trojan horse. We always have discussions about backdoors. That is why we're talking about the Trojan officer's horse. Threat and use for investigations at the same time. It's a balance. The more data I have, the more content I can, or context I can create and deduct. If you have different sources, you can provide more context. And if you can go into detail, for example, if you get full access to a computer system, it doesn't make a system if it's a government software or malicious software. You have access to data, content and metadata, and they provide a picture. Malicious software also, well, it looks at all the data once it's in a system, because why not? And when it gets official, a lot more comes into play. A large US network equipment manufacturer provided backdoors to the NSA, which was used by other countries to conduct espionage. There's always a way to misuse a system, no matter how well it's programmed or how ethically correct it is. You can abuse any system. Coming back to the laptop. Once you surrender data, you cannot control what happens to them, how they can be correlated. And context can also change. And that is a threat in itself.
What can also happen is that data from such a turned-in laptop or phone, which is nothing else than a computer that can make phone calls by now, that these data can end up at official desks of desks of agencies. Yeah. It can happen that you are photographed where you are on accident or on purpose, and these data might not be present anywhere, but it can be connected to a person or an agency. Yeah, especially with things like GPS data from a phone. Just imagine you are at the wrong time, at the wrong place with this phone. Then now is a record of you being there, of your device being there, and that device is connected to you. And let's be honest, such a phone, we have it everywhere. We just have it with us. And yeah, I always have it with me. I have it when I'm shopping, at home, at a public area, maybe even during a demonstration or protest. And maybe I'm not even protesting, but I just watch it and check it out. What have people on their transparents or on their posters? But I have been there, and there's a record of that. Yeah, and there we are at consequences, because not everything that has been recorded has to be right. That everyone can misinterpret things. That happens to everyone. agencies, official agencies, and yeah. But as soon as there is an image, a picture is generated, and it's super plausible, there might be some prejudices as well, and suddenly you have a picture that has to be true, right? And that's where it becomes dangerous, or can become dangerous, because you might be caught up in something and you don't understand what's happening. Yeah. And it can be accidents or just coincidences. So I'm at the wrong time, at the wrong place for a certain time, and maybe there's even a photo made by my camera, because on such a hard drive there are a lot of different things. Maybe there are photos that I made somewhere else, where at the same time people from a similar political group were having a protest or a gathering that I might not even have known of. But I maybe was at a foreign city in a cafe where in the back room there was a political discussion. And I'm drinking my coffee, I don't even notice that. But whoever is looking through my data, they also don't know what I know. And it can happen quite quickly when we are traveling. And yeah, there are hints for travelers, different countries where you have to, consider things. It's not necessarily that they are targeting you. We don't want to start like that. It's a very everyday thing, very banal. What if it's a laptop that a few people are sharing? It's not like everyone can just afford to buy their own laptop or want to. So if I don't need it full time, then yeah, why not share it? And if there's multiple accounts, that's even worse. A family computer, for example. And back then, there was Windows for work groups or living communities. And multi-user systems are just normal. And a lot of devices support that. And you are connected to the people who use it, especially if you lend it out. Oh, yeah. And that can be taken a step further. If we range the context further, and we are now in lists that go a layer up. And we now might think of certain countries, but we don't have to go far. For example, Poland or France, there are attacks. And there are a lot of things happening where investigations are needed and protest is necessary, depending on what side you are. Yeah, depending on what side you're on or what's happening, this can easily grow. So it sounds a bit stupid, but I don't want to use it as a negative example. If you hang out with the wrong people without knowing, just by standing next to them, or if you are in the same cafe, then there are consequences. And maybe those consequences are rather drastic. And depending on which countries you are traveling to or where you are, those consequences could become quite drastic. You can be part of an investigation, or they could just assume things about you without you knowing what's happening. And yeah, now our fictitious student that we were talking about, and at any point in time, it's possible that, we were talking about payment information before, that for a bigger phishing campaign, his payment information was used, and this campaign was using his data to rent servers or physical locations. So his name appears in the records. And it might appear in a criminal context. And if then, he was at a certain point in time, according to GPS, at a cafe where 3 meters further on the other side of the wall, there was a political discussion, or he was at a protest. Maybe he even was there. By now, there are enough reasons to protest. Or maybe he was at the wrong place, at the wrong time, at the wrong time, at the wrong place, and suddenly the picture forms itself. And this one person, who before just was a person who traded in their laptop, now suddenly the picture is getting tighter, and the name is suddenly on a list of suspects. Exactly. And this communication using wrong names, also payments, if I now assume that this person and this metadata is fitting to that person, then the information has to fit together as well. And especially people whose name was abused for something. We had 20 years ago already a case or a customer whose name was just used for a spam campaign. He could not continue to use his email account because everyone thought that it was him. And he received the worst, most extreme mails where people were angry at him, and they complained with colorful language. But we have similar things now where Twitter accounts were hacked in air quotes, because the password might have been weak, or there might have been a malware on a computer. Even the best password is weak against a virus. If you check out several versions of these malicious software, they are doing certain things. They are collecting certain data, and that will be used. For example, account data can be hacked in air quotes this way. And of course, looking back at the connections between these informations. So as soon as you have access to such an account or an address, you also have a very good overview about the social context of this person. So if you lose your context, your address book, so lose an unknown number of people have access to it, they can see not necessarily just the addresses, the names, the numbers, the birth dates, or the photos of people who I have in my address book, but maybe there's also tags. For example, mother, father, customer, cousin, best friend. So additional information. And this, combined with social media accounts, it has a ripple effect. So this whole network of people, so I'm not talking about devices, it's people behind those devices, will become very detailed for other people, and they can just look into it. And now not only I am affected, or our student is affected, but at that moment, or in the next step, maybe his family, or his friends, or everyone from his student study group who were going to the streets with Friday for Futures last week. And yeah, these networks or connections, it's difficult to keep them secret and protect them. It's possible, but it's difficult, because then you have to knowingly not do certain things. For a time, I had an address book in my phone with alternative names and comic pictures, but that has its limits, because till this day I have an entry there with a comic picture, and I don't know who it is, and I'm afraid to call them and confess that I don't know who they are. So yeah, there are countermeasures, but they are inconvenient. There are limits. Or you do it like my grandfather. Next to the landline phone, there was a collection of numbers on paper. But yeah, there are limits, and the social networks, they are guessing as well, depending on what social media or social network you are using, they are guessing, they are suggesting people. And sometimes it's just obvious because the network is visible via metadata. And yeah, the idea, the guessing of friends is rather harmless, but there were cases where the clients of a psychologist were suggested as friends because his address book was leaked. Yeah, so that's rather unpleasant. And I hope we could provide a few problem areas about this topic with data and metadata, some more feasible examples with a crime story, and show you how these topics come together. And earlier there was something about a blog post. Do you want to say something to that? Yeah, well, the last words changed it because what we have now is the end, and now we have to make a beginning out of this. We prepared a blog post and we want to provide you links and examples so you can see very nicely, okay, it's actually possible and this is happening without having to look to Hollywood or whoever is writing books about this right now. So we want to provide that with several media to just, jolt your imagination to action, because there are many stories and many things that I thought would be great fiction some years ago are yesterday's news by now, including X-Files. So our imagination struggles at times. So if you work on countermeasures, you really need the imagination and creativity. Otherwise, it's not possible to really connect all this and bring it together. And every time when it sounds, well, that's far-fetched, it usually, sadly, is not. And I would rather that all of this is just imagined, but nowadays you can read a Tagesschau or Heise to news outlets in the German-speaking area, what crazy stuff has happened. And I believe we can say thank you now and hope that there might be some questions. Yeah, thank you. So what do I have to do if I ordered some 3D printed weapons and paid with Bitcoin? So what can I do?
Yeah, thank you for this very nice conversation. It was fun. And of course, we also have questions. Maybe do you have a few concrete examples? Well, it's difficult, as we said, finding examples. The worst case scenario is someone getting access to your mail account, because your mail account is your everything, your one central point where everything comes together. Because if they have access to your emails, they have access to all of your other passwords and accounts. So a person can take over all of our accounts or delete them, and we might not even notice, and just lose access to all of our accounts all of a sudden. And that's a bad thing. Yeah. Many people are using two-factor authentication nowadays. And that helps you find out if your account's been hacked. But sometimes if you use Tor to look in, well, if you get 1,000 mails telling you there's a login from here and there, and of course you think, well, that was my intention. And we didn't even talk about the Internet of Things. What if your computer, TV, fridge, whatever, which is linked to your email, is hacked? That makes it even more absurd, but it's possible. I think years ago, there was this American hacker congress, Cyber, and they made kind of a competition out of it. Someone was looking for a hacker or daring people to hack them. And he went through it with an actual hacker. And it ended up a social hacking story. So there was a phone company. Well, they set up a story where a colleague couldn't reach them because they were abroad. And they put on baby whining in the background. And they made an emotional scheme out of that. So they prompted that person to get the password and to make a to transfer money on, and then they put that in the phone. And as soon as they had access to the telephone, they had access to everything. So that's a very special case, but our everyday lives are so interlinked. And what is also important, never ever be put under pressure. Let yourself be put under pressure. Because that prevents you from asking questions back. Never lose your calm. Never let yourself be put under pressure to make decisions. And that could be our third point. Medical devices, insulin pumps, heart pacers are becoming smarter and smarter, and they must be controlled from some point. And that is possible by remote nowadays. And this is also something you should look into, because there might be attack vectors in medical IoT devices, especially because you're wearing them inside of your body. That makes it even more personal. Well, another question. Well, surveillance, being target to surveillance. Well, the problem with surveillance is that it always presumes security gaps. So you get more security and more aware of security instead of our tax money being used. Sorry, the audio quality is very bad.
So we talked about big data already, and the option to collect and process a lot of data is new options, but also a lot of mistakes, because as soon as I can process this data, that's where I can arrive at these mistaken results. So a good surveillance is targeted. It does not lead to you drowning in data. The same for companies.